The jungle erupted in white fire. Not tracers, not explosions, just light, blinding, jagged, wrong. The Japanese soldiers on the ridge didn't hear the bullets first. They saw the flash, and by the time their eyes adjusted, half of them were already dead. The rest lay flat, screaming words no one could hear. One officer would later write in his diary that the Americans had found a way to shoot lightning. He called it Yuri no Hai, ghost fire. It was late 1943, somewhere in the thick tangle of the Solomon Islands, and the U.S. Marine Corps had just started issuing a new kind of ammunition for the Thompson submachine gun. They weren't supposed to be incendiary. They weren't experimental. They were just rounds loaded with a particular kind of powder that burned hotter and faster than standard issue. The goal was simple: increase muzzle velocity, tighten groupings, give the gun a sharper bite in close jungle combat. What no one anticipated was a side effect. Every time the trigger was pulled, the muzzle didn't just bark. It flashed like a camera bulb going off in the dark. In daylight, it was barely noticeable. But at night, in the wet blackness of the Pacific Theater, it was blinding. The first time Corporal Eddie Marek fired it, he thought his gun had malfunctioned. It was just after 200 hours, and his squad was dogging along a narrow trail, cutting through a banana grove. They'd been hearing movement for over an hour, rustling, snapping branches, the faint clink of metal on metal. The Japanese were probing, testing. Marek had his Thompson resting on a log, barrel pointed into the dark. His hands were slick with sweat and insect repellent. His sergeant had told him to hold fire until he saw something solid. But when the first shadow stepped into the clearing, Marek didn't think. He just squeezed. The burst was only 4 rounds. But the muzzle flash lit up the entire grove like a lightning strike. For a fraction of a second, Marek saw everything. The trees, the vines, the shocked face of the Japanese soldier froze in mid-step, his rifle still slung over his shoulder. Then the light vanished, and the jungle was black again. Marek blinked hard, seeing purple spots. His ears rang. He couldn't tell if he'd hit anything. Then he heard the body fall. Jesus Christ, Marek, what the hell was that? His sergeant hissed from the foxhole next to him. I don't know, Marek whispered back. I just fired. You just lit up the whole damn island. But the sergeant didn't tell him to stop, because in the silence that followed, there was no return fire, no charge, no grenades, just quiet. And after a few minutes, they heard something else. Voices, Japanese voices, moving away, retreating. That was the first time. By the second week, it was doctrine. The high-flash rounds weren't officially named. In reports, they were just called Type F.45 ACP, a designation that meant nothing to anyone outside of ordnance. But the men who used them gave them other names. Some called them strobes. Others called them Banshees, because of the way the light seemed to scream out of the barrel. The Japanese, when they started encountering them regularly, called them ghost fire. They believed the Americans had developed some kind of optical weapon, something that confused the mind as much as it killed the body. In a way, they were right. The science behind it wasn't complicated. The powder used in the new rounds burned at a higher temperature and produced more visible light during ignition. It was a byproduct of trying to push more energy into a .45 caliber cartridge without increasing the casing size. The engineers at Frankfurt Arsenal hadn't set out to create a psychological weapon. They were just trying to make the Thompson hit harder at 30 yards. But war has a way of taking accidents and turning them into advantages. By December 1943, select fire teams across the Pacific were being issued high-flash loads as part of their standard kit. Not every Marine got them. Not every Thompson. The supply was limited, and the rounds were considered specialty issue. But squad leaders and point men, the ones most likely to engage at night, started getting them in small batches. 20 rounds here, 50 there, enough to make a difference. Sergeant Raymond Tolliver was one of the first to understand how to use them tactically. He was a 32-year-old former railroad worker from Pennsylvania, lean and quiet, with a reputation for being calm under fire. His squad was operating on Bougainville, moving through dense rainforest toward a suspected Japanese supply depot. Intelligence said the depot was lightly defended, maybe a dozen men, But intelligence also said a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. They hit the depot just before dawn. Tolliver's plan was simple: get close, hit fast, and get out before the enemy could organize a response. But as they moved into position, they realized the depot wasn't lightly defended. It was a staging area. There were at least 40 Japanese soldiers visible, maybe more inside the tents and bunkers. Tolliver's squad was 12 men. They were outgunned, outmanned, and about to be spotted. Tolliver made a decision. Instead of pulling back, he positioned his 2 Thompson gunners, Marek and a kid named Duquesne, at opposite ends of the clearing. He told them to load high-flash rounds. Then he told them to open fire at the same time, on his signal, and keep firing in short bursts. Not to kill, just to light up the night. When he gave the signal, both guns erupted. The flashes came in rapid succession, overlapping, strobing across the clearing like a malfunctioning searchlight. The effect was immediate and total. The Japanese soldiers froze. Some dropped flat, others spun in circles, trying to figure out where the fire was coming from. The light was too bright, too fast, too disorienting. It looked like there were dozens of guns firing from every direction. In reality, it was just 2. Tolliver's riflemen, hidden in the dark, picked their targets carefully. They didn't use the high-flash rounds. They used standard ball ammunition, quiet and invisible. While the enemy was fixated on the strobing light, the riflemen dropped them one by one. The whole engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over, 23 Japanese soldiers were dead, and Tolliver's squad hadn't taken a single casualty. They burned the depot and pulled out before sunrise. Tolliver didn't file a special report. He didn't need to. Word spread on its own. Within a month, other squads were trying the same tactic. Some succeeded. Some didn't. The high-flash rounds weren't magic. They didn't guarantee victory. But they created something rare in jungle warfare, a moment of total confusion. And in that moment, a well-trained squad could do a lot of damage. The Japanese adapted, as they always did. By early 1944, night sentries were being issued dark goggles, crude and uncomfortable but effective at reducing the blinding effect. Officers started instructing their men not to stare at the light, to focus on sound instead. Some units began using their own form of counterflash tactics, firing flares to wash out the strobing effect. But even with adaptation, the psychological damage was done. The ghost fire had become a story, and stories of power. Private First Class Daniel, who was a Chinese-American Marine from San Francisco, 20 years old, soft-spoken, and deeply religious. He carried a small Bible in his jacket pocket and read it every night before sleep. He didn't like the Thompson. He thought it was too heavy, too loud, too brutal. But when his squad leader handed him a pouch of high-flash rounds and told him he was on point for the next night patrol, he didn't refuse. You didn't refuse. The patrol was supposed to be a reconnaissance run. Move along the coast, check for enemy positions, report back. No contact expected. But 2 hours in, they stumbled into a Japanese listening post. It was just 3 men in a shallow trench, barely armed, probably there to radio sightings. But the moment they saw the Marines, one of them grabbed a flare gun. Who didn't think? He raised the Thompson and fired. The muzzle flashed lit up the trench like a spotlight. The flare gun clattered to the ground. The 3 men crumpled, who kept firing until the magazine was empty. When the light stopped, he stood there, shaking, staring into the dark. He couldn't see the bodies. He could only see the afterimage burned into his retinas. The white shapes of men, frozen in mid-reach, mouths open. His squad leader put a hand on his shoulder. Good work. Who? Who didn't answer. He reloaded in silence and kept moving. That night, back in camp, he wrote a letter to his mother. He didn't mention the firefight. He didn't mention the flashes. He just wrote, "I am doing what I need to do. I pray it ends soon." He folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in the outgoing mail. Then he opened his Bible and read until his hands stopped shaking. By mid-1944, the high-flash rounds were being phased out, not because they didn't work. They worked too well. The problem was supply. The special powder was expensive and difficult to produce in large quantities. The demand for standard ammunition was already straining production lines. Adding a specialty round that only worked with one type of gun in one type of environment didn't make logistical sense. So quietly, without fanfare, the shipment stopped. The remaining stockpiles were used up, and the Thompson gunners went back to standard ball ammo. But the tactic didn't disappear. Even without the high-flash rounds, Marines continued to use muzzle flash as a tool. They learned to fire in coordinated bursts to create the illusion of more guns. They learned to position themselves so the flash concealed their actual location. They learned that light in the right hands could be as dangerous as a bullet. Eddie Marek survived the war. He came home to Ohio in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, and worked as a machinist for 30 years. He never talked much about the war, but once, at a VFW hall in the late 1970s, a younger veteran asked him what it was like to fight in the jungle. Marek thought for a long time before answering. It was dark, he said, darker than anything you could imagine. You couldn't see 10 feet in front of you most nights. So we learned to make our own light, just enough to see them, just enough to make them stop. The younger veteran asked what he meant. Marek smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. You ever fire a gun at night? Really fire it, not at a range, but when someone's shooting back. The flash doesn't just show you where you're aiming. It shows you everything. For 1 second, you see the whole world, and then it's gone and you're back in the dark. But that 1 second, it's enough. It has to be. Raymond Tolliver didn't come home. He was killed on Peleliu in September 1944, leading his squad through a Japanese bunker complex. He was shot twice in the chest and died before the medic reached him. His men carried his body out under fire. At his funeral, his mother was given a folded flag and a letter from his commanding officer. The letter said he was brave, resourceful, and loved by his men. It didn't mention the ghost fire. It didn't need to. Daniel, who came home and became a pastor. He spent 40 years serving a small church in Oakland, California. He rarely spoke about the war, even to his family. But every year on the anniversary of that night patrol, he would light a candle in his church and sit alone in the pews for an hour. He never explained why. His daughter once asked him what he was thinking about during those hours. He said he was praying for the men he'd killed, and for the men who'd killed for him, and for the strange, terrible mercy of being able to see in the dark. The high-flash rounds were never officially classified. There were no after-action reports specifically dedicated to them. They appeared in supply logs, in a few scattered memoirs, and in the nightmares of the men who faced them. The Japanese soldiers who survived encounters with ghost fire told stories that blurred the line between reality and myth. Some said the flashes burned the eyes permanently. Others said they could hear the light, that it made a sound like tearing paper. None of it was true, but all of it was believed. War is full of weapons that kill, but the ones that linger are the ones that confuse, the ones that make you doubt what you saw. The ones that turn a simple tool into something larger, something psychological. The high-flash rounds didn't win battles on their own, but they created fear. And fear, in the right moment, is more powerful than firepower. By 1945, as the war moved toward its end, the Thompson itself was being replaced by newer weapons. Lighter, faster, easier to produce. The high-flash rounds were forgotten, buried in the footnotes of ordnance history. But the lesson remained. Light is a weapon. Confusion is a weapon. And sometimes, the most effective way to stop an enemy isn't to kill him. It's to make him believe he's already dead. There's a photograph that survives from that time. It's grainy, black and white, taken somewhere in the Philippines in early 1945. It shows a Marine crouched in a foxhole, Thompson resting on the edge, barrel pointed into the jungle. You can't see his face. You can't see what he's looking at. But if you look closely at the image, just at the edge of the frame, there's a faint streak of overexposure, a blur of white light frozen in time. It's not a flaw in the film. It's a flash, one moment of light, captured forever in a war full of darkness. The men who used the high-flash rounds didn't think of themselves as innovators. They didn't think of themselves as tactical geniuses. They were just trying to survive, trying to give themselves an edge in a fight where every edge mattered. They took a quirk of chemistry and turned it into a doctrine. They took a mistake and made it into a myth. And when the enemy called it ghost fire, they didn't correct them. Because sometimes being a ghost is the only way to stay alive. The jungle doesn't remember. The battlefields have been reclaimed by vines and rain and time. The men who fired those rounds are mostly gone now, and the ones who remain don't talk much. But the story persists, in veteran halls, in declassified files, in the fading memories of men who saw something they couldn't explain and lived to tell about it. They put high-flash rounds in Thompson guns, and for a brief, strange moment in the Pacific War, light became a weapon, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally, and the men who wielded it learned something that no manual could teach them. That fear doesn't come from bullets alone. It comes from the things you can't predict, the things that don't make sense, the flash before the fall, the light before the death. And in that light, for just a second, everything is visible. The enemy, the truth, the cost. Then the darkness returns, and the war goes on. But the memory stays, the ghost fire, the moment when soldiers learn that the most terrifying thing in combat isn't the explosion, it's the split second before it, when the world lights up and you see exactly what's coming. That's the lesson the high-flash rounds taught. Not how to kill more efficiently, but how to break the mind before the body, how to weaponize confusion, how to turn a tool designed for death into something that delivered fear first. And in the end, fear is a weapon that never runs out of ammunition. The war ended. The guns were put away. The stories were filed and forgotten. But somewhere in the back of a warehouse, in a dusty archive, in the memory of an old man staring out a window, the ghost fire still burns. White, blinding, impossible to look away from. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the voices of the men who saw it, the ones who fired it, the ones who survived it. They all say the same thing. It wasn't the bullets that scared us. It was the light. If you want more untold stories from the shadows of history, subscribe now and tell us where you're watching this from. Drop a comment below.